March 1945, Burma. A Japanese infantry column, 2,000 men strong, marched down a dusty road at noon, maintaining perfect formation and discipline, when 6 American A-26B Invaders appeared on the horizon. 15 seconds later, the column had been so completely obliterated that Allied intelligence literally removed it from their maps as if it had never existed. But here's what the history books won't tell you. What kind of weapon system makes human beings not just die, but vanish? And what did the American pilots who wielded this apocalyptic power actually feel when they realized they'd become something more terrifying than warriors? Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. In early 1944, the war in the Pacific Ocean had been raging for more than 2 years. Japan was losing, but losing slowly. Their armies still controlled huge chunks of China, Burma, and the Philippines. But something had changed in the sky. American planes were everywhere now, and Japanese planes were becoming rare. The famous Zero fighters that once ruled the air were old and outnumbered. Many had been shot down. The pilots who flew them, the experienced ones, were mostly dead. On the ground, Japanese soldiers faced an impossible problem. They needed to move. Armies must march, to fight, to retreat, to bring food and bullets to the front lines. But marching in the daytime meant American planes could see them. Marching at night was safer, but it was slow and confusing in the jungle darkness. The Japanese commanders made a terrible choice. They ordered their men to march during the day anyway. They had no other option. Without movement, their armies would starve in place. So the columns marched, thousands of men walking in long lines down dirt roads, through valleys, across open ground. They marched like soldiers had marched for thousands of years, in neat formations, carrying their rifles, pulling carts, leading horses. Officers rode at the front. Flags hung limp in the humid air. The men were tired and hungry, but they were disciplined. They believed in their training, their officers, their emperor. They believed that discipline and courage could overcome anything. High above the Pacific, American factories were building something new. The Douglas Aircraft Company had designed a bomber called the A-26 Invader. It was sleek and fast, the fastest light bomber America had ever made. It could fly over 300 miles per hour, faster than most fighter planes from just a few years earlier. But speed was not what made it special. What made it special was the guns. The A-26B model carried 8 50 caliber machine guns in the nose, all pointing forward. Some versions carried even more, up to 14 guns total. Each gun could fire 800 bullets every minute. When all 8 guns fired together, they sent out more than 6,000 bullets per minute. The noise alone could make a man go deaf. The 50 caliber round was as long as a man's hand. It could punch through engine blocks, cut through trees, and tear apart anything made of flesh and bone. In Nebraska, a young man named James Morrison had grown up flying crop dusters over cornfields. He knew how to fly low and straight, how to judge distance, how to stay calm when the ground rushed up at you. The Army Air Corps taught him to fly the A-26B. At 25 years old, he became Lieutenant Morrison, a bomber pilot. His navigator and bombardier was a kid from Brooklyn named Eddie Kowalski, just 23, who kept careful notes about everything in a small leather journal. They were stationed at an air base where the jungle met the runway. The heat was crushing. Mosquitoes swarmed at dusk. But the food was good, and there was plenty of it. The ammunition seemed endless. Ground crews would reload the guns after every mission, wheeling out cart after cart of linked 50 caliber rounds. Morrison once asked a crew chief where it all came from. The man just laughed and said, "Detroit, sir. They make it faster than you can shoot it." One morning in March 1945, Morrison and Kowalski sat in a briefing room with 5 other crews. An intelligence officer pointed at a map of Burma. A red line marked a road through a valley. "Reconnaissance spotted a Japanese column here yesterday afternoon," the officer said. "Roughly 2,000 men, maybe more. Supply carts, horses, some trucks. They're moving south, probably trying to link up with another unit before we cut them off." Morrison studied the map. The road ran through an open valley with some trees on either side, but not thick jungle. Just a road in the open. He looked at Kowalski. They both understood what this meant. "No air cover?" another pilot asked. "None detected. Their air force is basically finished in this sector." The room was quiet for a moment. Then someone made a joke about it being a milk run, an easy mission. A few men chuckled. The briefing ended. Morrison walked out into the bright sunlight and looked at his aircraft sitting on the hardstand. It looked like an angry insect, all smooth metal and glass, with those 8 gun barrels poking out of the nose like stingers. That afternoon, they took off. 6 A-26B Invaders rose into the clear sky and headed north. Morrison flew in formation with the others, the engines humming steadily. Below, the jungle looked like a wrinkled green blanket. Rivers caught the sunlight and flashed like knives. Kowalski checked his maps and called out navigation points over the intercom. After 40 minutes, they found the road. And there, stretched out like a brown snake on the dirt, was the column. Morrison descended to get a better look. He could see them clearly now. Men in uniforms walking in organized rows, carts piled with supplies, horses pulling wagons, a few trucks crawling along, officers on horseback. It looked like something from an old painting, an army on the march. Morrison had seen targets before. He had bombed bridges and buildings and train yards, but he had never seen this. 2,000 men out in the open with nowhere to hide. No trenches, no bunkers, just walking down a road in the middle of the day. They looked so small from up here, so vulnerable. He realized with a cold feeling in his stomach that these men had no idea what was about to happen to them. They could not hear his engines yet. They did not know that 6 aircraft carrying 48 machine guns were about to turn their world into hell. He keyed his radio. "Starting attack run." Kowalski said nothing. Morrison could hear him breathing through the intercom. Morrison pushed the stick forward, and the Invader's nose dropped toward the earth. Morrison leveled the aircraft at 50 feet above the ground. The road filled his windscreen. He could see individual faces now, men looking up, starting to point. Some began to run. It was too late. He pressed both thumbs down on the firing buttons mounted on his control stick. The plane shuddered like it had hit a wall. All 8 guns erupted at once. The noise was beyond anything words could describe. It was not a sound so much as a physical force that hammered through the aircraft. Brass shell casings flew past the cockpit windows in a golden stream. The gun barrels glowed orange even in daylight. Tracers streaked down toward the road like lines of fire drawn by an angry god. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. The road exploded, not from bombs, but from the sheer volume of bullets hitting it. Dirt geysered up in huge fountains. Men did not fall down like in the movies. They came apart. They turned into red mist. Bodies tumbled through the air like rag dolls thrown by a giant child. Horses screamed and collapsed, their legs cut out from under them. A supply cart disintegrated into splinters and flying metal. A truck's engine block shattered and the whole vehicle lurched sideways, then burst into flames.
Morrison held the trigger for 15 seconds. In that time, his guns fired more than 1,500 rounds. He pulled up hard, climbing away, his heart pounding so hard he thought it might break through his ribs. He banked left and looked back. The road was chaotic. Smoke and dust hung in the air. Bodies were scattered everywhere, some moving, most not. The neat column had simply ceased to exist. The other 5 invaders made their runs. Each one raked the road with thousands of bullets. The air filled with smoke and screaming metal and the wet sounds of destruction. Morrison circled overhead, watching. In less than 3 minutes, the entire 2-mile column had been shredded. What had been an organized military unit was now just wreckage and corpses and a few desperate men running into the trees. Kowalski's voice came through the intercom, shaky and quiet. "Jesus Christ, Jim! Jesus Christ!" Morrison said nothing. He turned the aircraft south and headed for home. His hands were steady on the controls, but his mind was somewhere else, seeing it all again. The way men had just disappeared. The way the .50 caliber rounds had turned human beings into nothing. Back at the base, ground crews swarmed the aircraft before the engines even stopped. They opened the ammunition bays and started pulling out the empty belt links. A crew chief climbed up to Morrison's window and gave him a thumbs up. "Good hunting, sir?" Morrison nodded. He did not trust his voice. In the debriefing room, the intelligence officer asked for details. How many vehicles were destroyed? Estimated casualties? Morrison heard himself giving numbers. 4 trucks, maybe 300 dead, probably more. The officer wrote it all down like he was recording the weather. Another pilot joked that it was easier than shooting ducks. Everyone laughed, except Morrison and Kowalski. That night, Kowalski wrote in his journal by flashlight. Morrison watched him from his cot. Finally, Kowalski looked up. "We expended 4,200 rounds today, in under 3 minutes. You know what they did? They just brought out more ammunition, crates and crates of it, like it grows on trees." Morrison thought about the Japanese soldiers on that road. How many bullets did each of them carry? Maybe 60 rounds, maybe 100 if they were lucky. And here the Americans were, shooting thousands of bullets in seconds and having more delivered before they even asked for it. The missions continued. Every few days, they would hunt columns. It became routine. Intelligence would spot a concentration of troops on a road, and the squadron would go erase it. That was the word they started using, erase, like rubbing out a pencil mark. The Japanese column had been erased. The supply convoy had been erased. Whole units simply disappeared from the maps. Morrison started noticing things. The way the briefing officers talked about targets now. Casual, bored even. One called it mowing the lawn. The phrase made Morrison's stomach turn, but he said nothing. He was a good pilot. He followed orders. He came back alive, mission after mission. But the photographs bothered him. After each mission, reconnaissance planes would fly over and take pictures. The intelligence people wanted to assess the damage. Morrison saw one of these photos once. The road was covered with dark shapes that had been people. Equipment was scattered like a child's toys after a tantrum. There were no survivors visible in the image, just emptiness where a column had been. Kowalski showed him an intercepted Japanese radio message that had been translated. A unit commander was begging for permission to move only at night. He said his men could not survive the American aircraft. He said they needed air cover or they would all die. The response came back, request denied. Maintain daylight schedule. No air support available. Morrison read it twice. They knew. The Japanese commanders knew what was happening to their men. And they were ordering them to march anyway, in daylight, on open roads, because they had no choice. The war demanded movement, and movement meant death. But staying still meant death too, just slower.
One evening, Morrison walked out to the airfield and stood beside his Invader. He put his hand on the smooth metal skin, still warm from the day's sun. This machine cost more money than his father's farm was worth. It burned fuel faster than most cars used in a month. It fired ammunition that cost more per bullet than a good steak dinner. And there were thousands of these aircraft, thousands. The Japanese were fighting with courage and discipline and the willingness to die. But they were fighting against factories, against supply chains, against an industrial system that could produce bullets faster than they could be fired and planes faster than they could be destroyed. It was not really a fair fight. It was arithmetic, addition and subtraction. The Japanese subtracted a few American planes and pilots. America added hundreds more. The math was simple and brutal and unstoppable. In April 1945, the squadron moved to the Philippines. The Japanese were retreating from Manila, trying to escape into the mountains. Intelligence reported a massive column on a coastal road, over 3,000 troops plus civilians who had been forced to march with them. Morrison's squadron scrambled 6 aircraft. This would be the biggest target they had ever hit. They found the column in the early afternoon. It stretched along the road for nearly 4 miles, the longest Morrison had ever seen. He could make out women and children mixed in with the soldiers, supply wagons, ox carts, people carrying bundles on their backs. It looked like an entire town was moving. Morrison's stomach knotted. He called the flight leader. "Sir, there are civilians down there." The radio crackled. "Confirmed. Intelligence says they're being used as human shields. Japanese are mixed throughout. We have orders to engage." Morrison looked at Kowalski. Through the small window between the cockpit and the bombardier station, he could see his friend's face. Kowalski looked pale. "Orders received," Morrison said into his radio. The 6 invaders began their runs. Morrison went in third. He aimed for clusters of uniformed soldiers, trying to avoid the groups with women and children. But at 50 feet, traveling 300 miles per hour with 8 guns firing, precision was impossible. The bullets went everywhere. The road became a storm of metal and dust and blood. He pulled up and circled, watching the other planes make their passes. For 40 minutes, the 6 aircraft took turns diving and firing. They climbed away, circled, and came back again. The ammunition seemed endless. Every time Morrison thought they must be running low, he checked his gauges and saw he still had thousands of rounds left. The guns kept firing, the road kept erupting. When they finally broke off, not because they were out of ammunition, but because they were low on fuel, Morrison looked down at what they had done. The column was gone. Just gone. Smoke rose from dozens of fires. Bodies were everywhere. Soldiers and civilians mixed together. Impossible to tell apart from this height. Some people were still moving, crawling, trying to reach the trays. Most were not moving at all. Reconnaissance would later estimate that 60 to 70% of the column had been killed or wounded, between 2,000 and 2,500 people, in 40 minutes by 6 airplanes. That night, Morrison could not eat. He sat on his cot in the tent while the other pilots played cards and listened to the radio. Kowalski came and sat next to him. For a long time, neither of them spoke. Finally, Kowalski said, "I did the math. 6 planes, 40 minutes. Maybe 2,000 people died. Jim, back in Brooklyn, 2,000 people is like 4 city blocks. We erased 4 city blocks today." Morrison stared at the tent wall. They were soldiers. They would have killed us if they could. Yeah, but did you see them? They were just walking, like it was a normal day. Like they still thought they had a chance. They had no idea what was about to happen. Morrison lay back on his cot. He stared up at the canvas ceiling, listening to the sounds of the base around him. Generators humming, men laughing, a radio playing music from home. Everything was normal here. Clean uniforms, hot food, mail from loved ones.
And just a few hours ago, he had helped kill thousands of people who were starving and exhausted and had nothing left but the order to keep walking. Later that night, he took out a piece of paper and wrote in the dim light. He was not much for writing, but he needed to get the thoughts out of his head. He wrote about his father's tractor back home, how it cost $800 and was the most expensive thing his family owned besides the land. He wrote about how his aircraft cost $170,000. That was 212 tractors. America had thousands of these planes, thousands. And the Japanese had what? Brave men with rifles and not enough bullets. He wrote, "They are fighting American factories with samurai spirit, and we are killing them so fast they just disappear. Is this even war anymore, or is it just deletion?" He folded the paper and put it in his footlocker. He never showed it to anyone.
The missions continued through May and June and July. Morrison flew 87 combat missions total. He stopped counting the dead after the first month. The numbers were too big and too terrible. He became very good at his job. He could put his bullets exactly where he wanted them. He learned to aim ahead of running soldiers, to lead them like shooting at ducks. He learned which parts of a truck to hit to make it explode. He became efficient. On August 8, 1945, 2 days before the second atomic bomb would drop on Nagasaki, Morrison flew his last mission. The target was a Japanese column in Manchuria, retreating from the Soviet armies that had just invaded from the north. They were trapped between the Soviets on one side and the Americans on the other. Morrison made his approach, dropping to 50 feet. The column saw him coming. Most of the soldiers scattered, running for the ditches and trees. But one man did not run. He stood in the middle of the road, facing the oncoming aircraft. He held his rifle straight up over his head, both hands gripping it. He did not point it at the plane. He just held it up, like an offering, or a prayer, or a final gesture of defiance. Morrison's thumbs rested on the firing buttons. The man grew larger in his windscreen, still standing, still holding that rifle up. For just a moment, Morrison saw him as a person, someone's son, someone's brother, a man who had been ordered to march down this road, who knew what was coming, who had decided to face it standing up. Morrison pulled up without firing at that section of road. He climbed away and let the next plane make the run. He never told anyone about it, but that night he wrote in his journal, "He knew he was about to die and he just stood there. What kind of orders make a man do that? What kind of world makes killing this easy?" Morrison came home to Nebraska in September 1945. The war was over. Japan had surrendered. The troop ships brought thousands of men back across the Pacific, back to a country that had never seen a single bomb fall on its soil, back to cities with lights that stayed on all night and stores full of food, and roads where nobody got strafed by aircraft. His family met him at the train station. His mother cried and held him. His father shook his hand hard, the way farmers do, and looked him in the eye. His little sister, now not so little, hugged him and said he looked different, older, she said. He was 26, but he felt 100. They drove home in his father's truck, past fields of corn that stretched to the horizon. The corn was tall and healthy, standing in perfect rows. The harvest would be good this year. Everything looked the same as when he had left, but Morrison felt like he was seeing it all for the first time. That first night at dinner, his father asked about the war. The table was full of food, pot roast and potatoes and fresh bread and butter and green beans from the garden. More food than Morrison had seen on one table in months, even with the good mess hall food on base. He thought about the Japanese soldiers he had seen, how thin they had been, how they had looked like walking skeletons near the end. "I flew bombers," Morrison said, "the A-26B Invader, fast plane, good plane." His father nodded. He had fought in France in 1918, in the trenches. "Bombers, that's rough. Did you see much action?"
"87 missions," Morrison said. His mother gasped. His father's eyes widened. 87, my God, son. Morrison did not tell them what those missions had been. He did not tell them about the columns on the roads. He did not tell them about the 850 caliber guns, or the way men disappeared into red mist, or the 40-minute attack that killed 2,000 people. He just nodded and ate his pot roast and changed the subject. His father understood that some things could not be talked about. He had his own memories from France, from the mud and the gas and the wire. He did not push. They talked about the farm instead, about the new tractor they were thinking of buying, about corn prices and weather and neighbors. But that night, lying in his old bed in his old room, Morrison could not sleep. He kept seeing that soldier on the road in Manchuria, standing with his rifle held high, waiting for death. He kept hearing the sound of 8 guns firing at once. He kept seeing columns of people walking down dusty roads, having no idea that in 30 seconds they would simply stop existing. He had brought home a few things from the war. His flight log was one of them. It was a small book with a brown cover filled with dates and times and target locations. 87 entries. Next to some of them, intelligence officers had written estimated casualty figures. Morrison had never added them all up. He did not want to know the total, but he knew it was in the thousands, maybe 10,000, maybe more. All those people gone because he had pressed his thumbs down on 2 buttons. He also had a piece of shrapnel in a small cloth bag. It had come from a Japanese truck that his guns had destroyed. He had found it on the runway after a mission, still hot. He had kept it, though he did not know why. Sometimes he would take it out and hold it, feeling the rough edges, the weight of it. It was a thing that had been part of someone's world, and now that world was gone. The third thing he had brought home was a letter. It had come from Eddie Kowalski 3 months after they had both returned home. Eddie had stayed in the Air Force. He was flying missions in Korea now, in the new war that had started that. The letter was short. Eddie wrote, "I think we got used to erasing people. It became normal. That's what scares me most. Love to your family. Stay safe." Morrison had heard 6 months later that Eddie's plane had been shot down over Korea. There had been no parachute.
Morrison tried to go back to normal life. He worked on the farm. He planted and harvested. He fixed equipment and mended fences. He went to church on Sundays. He dated a girl from town for a while, but it did not work out. She said he seemed distant, like part of him was somewhere else. She was right. One October morning, just after dawn, Morrison stood in the middle of a cornfield. The corn had been harvested and the field was empty stubble. The sky was clear and blue. A crop duster flew overhead, heading toward a neighbor's farm. It was the same model plane Morrison had flown before the war, back when he was just a kid who liked flying and had never hurt anyone. He watched the crop duster disappear over the horizon. He thought about those Japanese soldiers. They had woken up one morning just like this. They had eaten breakfast, probably rice and maybe some fish if they were lucky. They had put on their uniforms and picked up their rifles and fallen into formation. They had marched down a road, following orders, believing in something. Their emperor, maybe. Their duty, their honor. And then, without warning, without even time to be afraid, they were gone. Morrison looked down at the dirt under his feet. Good Nebraska soil, dark and rich. This dirt grew corn that fed America and half the world. The same system that made these fields productive had made his aircraft unstoppable. Factories and farms and supply chains and railroads and oil wells and mines all working together, all producing more than anyone needed. That was what had won the war. Not courage, not tactics, just the simple fact that America could make things faster than anyone else could destroy them. He thought about what he would tell his children someday, if he ever had children. Would he tell them he was a war hero? Would he show them his medals?
Or would he tell them the truth, that modern war was not about bravery, it was about production, about resources, about one side having so much that they could erase the other side like pencil marks on paper? A breeze moved through the empty field. Morrison pulled his coat tighter. He thought about that soldier on the road one more time, the one who had stood facing the aircraft with his rifle held high. That man had known he was about to die. He had known it was pointless, but he had stood there anyway, because maybe standing up with dignity was all he had left. Morrison whispered to the empty field, I saw you stand, and I let you live that one time. I hope it mattered." Then he turned and walked back toward the farmhouse, where his mother would have breakfast ready, where the radio would be playing music, where life went on in a country that had never seen war come to its doorstep. He walked slowly, carrying the weight of all those disappeared people, all those columns that had simply stopped existing, all because he had been very good at pressing 2 buttons on a control stick. The history books would call it victory. Morrison called it something else, but he had no word for it. So he just kept walking, and the empty field stretched out behind him, and the morning sun rose over Nebraska. And somewhere far away, on roads he would never see again, the ghosts of marching men walked on forever. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.